My name is Angelina, and tonight, as I sit here alone with nothing but the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, I feel like my entire life has been one long, unfinished story. A story I never asked to write. Maybe if you listen to me, really listen, you will understand what it feels like when love turns into silence. When the person you trusted with your whole heart slowly becomes the reason it shatters into pieces. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always the woman with tired eyes and a smile that hides more pain than it shows. Once, I was just a girl with dreams. Small dreams, maybe, but dreams that made me believe life could be beautiful. I grew up in a little town where the evenings smelled of rain and fresh bread from the bakery down the street. I used to sit on the porch of our tiny house with my mother, watching the sun dip behind the hills. My mother would tell me stories about love, the kind of love that holds you when you're breaking, that stays even when the world walks away. She would say, "Angelina, love is the only thing that can turn a house into a home." And I believed her. When I met Adrian, I thought he was the answer to all those dreams. He came into my life like the first light after a long night. He had this way of looking at me as if I was the only person in the world. He made me laugh in ways I didn't know I could. He sent flowers to my work, wrote me little notes that I kept under my pillow, called me at midnight just to say he missed me. He made me believe in forever. We got married within a year. I can still see that day in my mind. The white dress, the church bells ringing, the way his eyes locked on mine as if he was promising me the whole world. I thought to myself, this is it, Angelina. This is your happily ever after. I moved into his house in the city, a place so big and shiny it almost scared me. But I told myself I would make it a home. I would fill it with laughter, with warmth, with love. The first few months were like a dream. We had dinners together, late-night movies, long drives with the windows down and music playing loud. He would call me his world, hold my hand in public, talk about the children we would have one day. I wrote letters to my mother telling her how lucky I was, how love had given me everything I ever wanted. But slowly, so slowly I didn't even realize it at first, things began to change. He started coming home late. At first, he would smile and say it was work. But the smiles became fewer, the excuses sharper. If dinner wasn't ready, he would sigh and say, "What do you even do all day, Angelina?" The first time he raised his voice at me, I remember standing there frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. It was over something small. I had forgotten to iron his shirt. His words cut through me like glass, and I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Because the next day, he brought flowers, kissed my forehead, said he was sorry, and like a fool in love, I forgave him. But the shouting came more often after that. Sometimes it wasn't shouting. It was silence. And do you know what hurts more than anger? A silence so heavy it feels like you're invisible in your own home. I tried to make things better. I cooked his favorite meals, wore the dresses he liked, laughed at jokes that weren't funny just to keep the peace. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. He started criticizing the way I talked, the way I walked, even the way I smiled. Slowly, I stopped being myself. One night it was raining. I sat by the window watching the drops slide down the glass. The world outside was crying, and so was I. I looked at my reflection. Tired eyes, trembling hands. A girl who didn't recognize herself anymore. I whispered, "Where did you go, Angelina? Where is the girl who believed in love?" The loneliness was the worst part. Living with someone who doesn't see you anymore is like screaming in an empty room. I miss the man who once held my hand and told me I was his everything. Now he barely looked at me. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. He would say it was work, but deep down, I knew. I knew there was someone else. The perfume on his shirt, the late-night texts he would hide, the way he smiled at his phone, but never at me anymore. It told me everything I needed to know. But I stayed. Because love makes you hold on even when it's killing you slowly. One evening, I cooked his favorite dinner. I wore the dress he once said made me look beautiful. I waited, hoping maybe tonight he would come home early. Maybe tonight he would smile at me the way he used to. But he didn't come home at all. I fell asleep on the couch with the lights on, the food cold on the table. When he finally walked in after midnight, he didn't even look at me. He just said he was tired and went to bed. I sat there staring at the cold food, and something inside me broke. Not loudly, not with tears, but quietly. Like a glass falling in slow motion. I realized then I wasn't his world anymore. Maybe I never was. That night, after Adrian walked past me like I didn't even exist, I sat on the couch for hours. The house was so silent I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking clock on the wall, my own breathing. Uneven, shaky. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? Was I not pretty enough? Not smart enough? Not enough? But deep down, I knew it wasn't about me. It was about him. Something in him had changed. And no matter how much I tried to bring back the man I once loved, he was gone. The next morning, he barely said a word. He had his breakfast in silence, scrolled through his phone, and left for work without even looking at me. I stood by the window watching him drive away, feeling like I was watching my own happiness disappear down the road. Days turned into weeks. Some nights he wouldn't come home at all. Some nights he came home drunk, throwing his keys on the table, mumbling excuses I didn't even bother to question anymore. And some nights he came home angry, really angry. The first time he pushed me, it wasn't hard. Just a shove because I asked him where he'd been. He looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. Cold, sharp, like I was nothing but air in front of him. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, not my friends. I was too ashamed because I kept thinking maybe it was my fault. Maybe if I cooked better, if I stayed quiet, if I smiled more, things would go back to how they used to be. But they never did. One evening, I found the courage to ask him if there was someone else. My voice was shaking, but I had to know. He didn't deny it. He just laughed. Laughed like I had told him a bad joke. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Maybe if you were half the woman she is, I wouldn't need anyone else." That sentence. It felt like someone had taken a knife and carved it into my chest. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my eyes were swollen. I kept staring at my reflection in the mirror, wondering when I became this version of me. A woman who couldn't even recognize herself anymore. I thought about leaving, packing my bags and walking out. But where would I go? My mother lived miles away in that little town. And I had no job, no money of my own. Adrian controlled everything. The house, the bank accounts, even the car keys. He had taken away not just my happiness, but my independence too. One night, I found his phone left on the table. He was in the shower. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, scrolling through the messages. There she was. Her name was Clara. Beautiful words exchanged between them. Promises. Plans. Love that used to be mine now belonged to someone else. I put the phone down before he came out. I didn't say a word. But something inside me began to die after that night. I stopped waiting for him to come home. I stopped cooking dinners he never ate. I stopped dressing up, stopped smiling, stopped hoping. The house was silent most days. He didn't care, and I didn't either. At least that's what I told myself. But the truth? I was breaking piece by piece every single day. One rainy afternoon, I sat by the window again, watching the world blur through the raindrops. I thought about the girl I used to be, full of dreams, laughter, love. That girl was gone. In her place was someone I didn't even know anymore. I wrote a letter to my mother that day. I didn't send it, but I wrote it. "Mom," I wrote, "I'm not okay. I thought love was supposed to make you feel safe, but I feel like I'm drowning. Every day I wake up hoping things will get better, but they don't. I miss you. I miss home. I miss myself." I folded the letter and hid it in my drawer. That night, Adrian didn't come home again. But this time, I didn't cry. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the empty doorway, realizing I was waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Not just that night. Not ever. The day I finally broke was not a day of shouting. It wasn't the night he came home drunk. It wasn't even the evening when I saw his messages with Clara again. It was a quiet morning. Adrian was sitting at the table drinking his coffee, scrolling through his phone as usual. I placed his breakfast in front of him like I always did. He didn't even look at me. And something inside me just stopped. I stood there watching him, this man I had loved with everything I had, and I realized I had nothing left to give. No tears, no anger, no hope, nothing. I went back to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a small bag. I didn't pack much. Just a few clothes, my mother's photo, the little savings I had secretly kept aside. My hands were trembling, but my heart felt strangely calm. For months I had been living like a shadow in this house. Today I was done. Adrian didn't even notice when I walked past him with the bag. He didn't look up, didn't ask where I was going. That told me everything I needed to know. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds, but I felt lighter than I had in years. My legs shook as I walked to the bus stop, but I didn't stop. The bus ride to my mother's town felt like the longest ride of my life. I sat by the window, watching the world rush past, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. When the bus finally stopped, I saw her. My mother, standing there in her old sweater, eyes wide the moment she saw me. I didn't say anything. I just fell into her arms and cried like a child. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. That night, for the first time in so long, I slept without fear. But the pain didn't vanish. It was still there, buried deep. Some mornings I woke up shaking, hearing Adrian's voice in my head. Some nights I dreamed about the life we were supposed to have, the kids we talked about, the house we planned, the love we promised. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, my mother sat beside me. "Angelina," she said softly, "you have to decide what comes next. You can't stay in the past forever." I nodded, but I didn't know how to move on. How do you start again when the person you trusted most left you in pieces? Weeks passed. I found a small job at a bookstore in town. It wasn't much, but it was something. I met people who smiled at me without expecting anything. Slowly, very slowly, I began to feel like maybe life wasn't over, but healing isn't a straight road. Some days were good. Some days I felt like I was drowning again. One rainy afternoon, I received divorce papers in the mail. No note, no explanation, just his signature at the bottom of the page. I stared at them for a long time. Then I signed. It was over. I thought I would feel free. I thought I would feel strong. But all I felt was empty. Like someone had taken a part of me I would never get back. Months later, I heard he had married Clara. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood by the window, watching the rain, and whispered to myself, "Let him go." Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to choose yourself, even if it breaks your heart. And slowly, very slowly, I began to learn how to live again. Time is a strange thing. One moment you feel like you will never heal, and then months later you look back and realize you have come so far. For a long time after the divorce, I lived in silence. I worked at the bookstore, came home to my mother's small house, cooked dinner with her, and sometimes sat on the porch watching the stars. At first, the silence hurt. It reminded me of all the nights I waited for Adrian to come home. All the nights I cried quietly so he wouldn't hear. But slowly, that same silence began to feel peaceful. Healing. I started writing in a journal. Every night before bed, I wrote letters I would never send, to Adrian, to myself, to the girl I used to be before everything fell apart. And one night, as I read back my own words, I realized something. I wasn't writing about him anymore. I was writing about me. The girl who loved too much. The woman who survived. The person who was learning to breathe again. One afternoon at the bookstore, a man walked in. He looked about my age, maybe a little older. His name was Ethan. He wasn't charming like Adrian. He wasn't smooth with his words. He just smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in years. He came back the next week, and the week after. Sometimes he bought books. Sometimes he just talked about the weather, about the flowers blooming in the park, about nothing and everything. I didn't trust it at first. How could I? After everything I had been through, the idea of feeling something again scared me more than being alone. But Ethan never pushed. He never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. He just stayed. And slowly, like sunlight after a long winter, warmth began to creep back into my life. One evening, my mother saw me smiling after Ethan left the store. "Life gives second chances, Angelina," she said softly. "Sometimes when we least expect it." I wanted to believe her, but love wasn't simple for me anymore. It wasn't flowers and promises and dreams of forever. It was fear. It was memory. It was scars I carried inside me. Still, there was something about Ethan's kindness that felt safe. Months passed. One spring morning, Ethan asked if I wanted to walk with him by the lake. The air was soft, filled with the smell of blooming roses. We sat by the water, watching the sunlight ripple across the surface. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, "I don't know what hurt you, Angelina, and you don't have to tell me. But I just want you to know, not everyone leaves. Not everyone breaks what they hold." Something inside me cracked open, not with pain this time, but with the smallest fragile spark of hope. Healing didn't happen in one day. It didn't happen in one season. But slowly I began to laugh again, to dream again, to live again. I never forgot the girl who cried in her mother's arms after leaving Adrian. I never forgot the nights I felt like I would never be whole. But I also learned this. Sometimes broken things grow back stronger. Years later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I stood in the garden of my little house. A house I bought with my own money, in my own name. There were roses blooming along the fence. My mother lived with me now. And yes, Ethan was there too, bringing tea out to the porch like he always did. I had thought my life ended the day I walked out of Adrian's door. But life had just begun. And as I stood there watching the sunlight spill across the flowers, I whispered to myself, "You made it, Angelina. You made it.